Two, one.
Hey everybody, welcome to the ABA's What's This Bird Live. My name is Nate Swick. I am the host of the ABA's American Birding Podcast and do a lot of the various online things for the ABA. As usual, I am joined here fortnightly, bi-weekly with my friend and colleague Greg Neise. He does web development at the ABA. Greg, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really good, really good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're
Hey, folks,
so,
everybody, we're going live in three different places. We are on the ABA's Facebook, our Facebook group. What's This Bird? We are also on the ABA's YouTube channel and on the ABA's Twitter feed. So I'm trying to keep an eye on all three of those places. If you have any questions about birds or bird identification, please let us know in those places. But we've got some pictures for you that
yeah,
we're
we
going to
do.
get to shortly. But first, we're in February. Does it feel like it's sort of the doldrums of the birding year a little bit for
Oh
you,
God,
Greg?
like February
Yeah,
1st. January
yeah.
was pretty exciting here,
February was all right.
and January was pretty exciting around the ABA area.
Yeah.
And I'm like at least some of us are playing the
Oh,
fantasy
yeah. So
birding
you've got an
ABA
idea
big
of
year,
what's going on. Yeah.
and they're just this big. So part of the way the game works is there's this big list of rarities, and you can chase the
Hmm.
rarities. And throughout the month of January, that list is pretty much consistent because birds don't tend to move around too much.
Right. It's
Um,
all red wings, right? It's just
well,
only red wings, wall to wall red
it's
wings.
redwings and red-legged thrushes and Cuban peewee and
What is
all
that?
these things all over. But then by the end of the month, I scooped up all those rarities, and now there hasn't been any. Like I get this big, I'm like, oh, got that, got that, got that, got that. There just hasn't
Yeah.
been anything new, which is a long way of saying, yeah, we're in the doldrums.
Yeah, that's the way it is. I do the weekly rare bird alert that goes out every Friday morning on the ABA's website, and it tends to be a little bit slow on Fridays. This one in particular was a little bit slow. In fact, I just got an email from someone, and I think I may have actually, or I got a message from someone that said that I may have forgotten it, may not have gone up, and I may be doing that while we talk about birds a little bit. Um, but
Whoops.
but yeah, it's I don't know why that is. I don't know why February. It's like with the time when birds just kind of hold, right? They don't go anywhere. It's just that we're all just waiting for spring to come, both
Yep.
birders and birds, waiting for the weather to heat up and then they can get going where they need to go. But right now
Exactly.
we're just in a holding pattern.
And
Yeah,
the
and I
and
noticed that
speaking
people out of
speaking of holding patterns, much of the ABA area is being afflicted by this what's called a Greenland block, which is
Mhm.
a big mass of warm air that sets up over Greenland and the strait to the west, and it,
Yeah.
it pumps it pushes cold air, what's called a polar vortex, down into southern Canada and much of the United States, and that has just been sitting there without moving. And lots of places we're getting really cold weather. We're getting snow in the south. There's ice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we
but
had it
this
today here in North Carolina. We had freezing rain and there's ice on the ground.
yeah, there's no dynamism to the weather. There's nothing to move birds
Yeah.
around. It's just this big
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
plunk of cold with no really steering winds or anything.
except
Um,
for the easterlies from northern Europe that are bringing migratory thrushes over to
yeah.
the
Well,
northeast Atlantic Canada. That's like the only thing that's going on right now.
yeah, yeah. So well, so that's what's going on.
Yeah, I just
Let's
want to
see
remind
who's
folks that if you have any other questions about birds or birding, please let us know in the comments. We're trying to keep an eye as best we can on all the various things. Jacob Bagley, with us again on YouTube, says he's going to see the northern Hassana, whatever you
Jasana.
want to call it, Jasana in
Jasana.
southeast Arizona. That thing's been there forever. That is the one good
Yeah.
thing about this block that has kept birds from moving, is that all the noteworthy ABA area rarities that have been sticking around for most of the winter are still there. It's been
Yeah.
pretty wild.
Yeah, Jared
Hello,
Clark
Jacob.
chimes
Hope you're
in
doing
that
all right.
there's two more Red Wings in Nova Scotia this week.
Yeah, I think a total
Yeah.
of 3 in Nova Scotia and 3 in Newfoundland, and obviously 2 in Maine,
Yeah.
and 1 in British Columbia. One of these things is not like the
And
other.
Jenny Shockley, of course, is here. Hi, Jenny. Um, so we're gonna, usually we just kind of pull up a picture that we've. So for those of you who are chiming in for the first or watching here for the first time, our sort of method is to pull photos from the What's This Bird group, where we identify bird pictures for people, and then discuss the picture a little bit, and then move on to the next. What we're gonna do here now is a little bit different. We're gonna have a bunch of slides and a lot of discussion about one particular bird and the birds it's confused with. So we're going to kind of dive in a little bit. So let me know when you're ready to go to that, Nate. I think we are.
Yeah, let's have it. Yeah, I saw you were talking about this in the What's This Bird group this morning, so I figured this was probably it's funny because I saw this picture and I was like, oh, that's an interesting bird, and then lo and behold, it was on the list of things that we were going to talk about. So yeah, let's have it.
So so here we are. This bird that was photographed near Houston, Texas, and it's so these are, just so you're not confused, these are 2 photos of the same exact bird taken moments apart by the same photographer.
Greg, why is it not a vulture?
Okay, Jenny, I am not going to go full Ted. I am not going to go full Ted today.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Let's start with it. Is obviously not a sandhill crane.
Greg.
But the first thing to say about this bird, for those who know what it is, can also notice that the plumage is kind of weird. It's dilute and kind of missing. A lot of the color is missing, and it's hard to tell if this is maybe something happening in the camera, because the picture on the right has a little more color than the one on the left. But this is so we see a small bird, which we can judge the size based on the fence it's sitting on. Those planks are no more than a ½ inch thick, and it has a conical bill. It's streaky brown, and it has a conical bill, which steers us towards sparrows, which are the streaky birds with conical bills. Although we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that a little bit later.
Yeah, specifically the New World sparrows, the Imbrizidae, not your Old World sparrows.
So what do you notice on this bird here?
So the first thing that jumps out to me when I saw this bird was just how fine those streaks are. Just like they're really small, they're really narrow, and that to me, along with the location in Texas, says Lincoln sparrow. That's the first thing that would jump out to me. But I will say I did pause a little bit because, boy, that bird is dilute, as you say. It is not as kind of this rich, buff, brown, kind of almost olivey buff color that you typically see with Lincoln sparrows, and that's part of what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, and some of the other things that we can notice, and if you're familiar with Lincoln versus Song versus Savannah, the shape of the bird's bill, it's kind of long, and it's not it's longer than it is tall or wide.
Yeah.
And it has a rather thin appearance compared to some other sparrows. And on the right, we can see that little kind of a raised bushy crest compared to on the left.
Tom Marson Ryan mentions that in the comments. Yeah, that little crest is something you typically associate with Lincoln sparrow. It gives a
correct
that distinct kind of peaky-headed look, which we frequently see with Lincoln sparrows.
And
except
looking at the two, well, this bird is photographed in the rain, and you can see the rain streaking through the picture. And most birds in the rain, they tend to hunker down and flatten their feathers to make them as waterproof as possible. And that's what's happening on the left. On the right, maybe the photographer shifted their position and alerted the bird a little bit, and it raised its crest in the sort of more traditional Lincoln Sparrow pose. But one of the things we can also see here, and like even if you squint at the images, the malar, that mustache stripe that comes from the mouth down, is kind of the most prominent thing on the face. The rest of the face is kind of gray and muted. We see a little bit of an eye ring, but that stripe on the jaw is really noticeable.
Bright.
So some of the,
and especially notable, and I think I know where you're going with this, Greg, is that it's a different color than the eyebrow, which is in a lot of sort of similar looking streaky sparrows that you might confuse Lincoln Sparrow with, in particular song sparrow and Savannah sparrows we'll talk about a little bit later. Those would be more or less the same color.
Yeah. And so one of the people commenting posted this image, which is the big image that you see here from the Peterson field guide, and pointed out the breast spot on the bird and suggested that it might be a Southwest Lincoln Sparrow.
Song sparrow.
Or song sparrow, I'm sorry. And so, I don't want to really critique field guides here, but I do want to point out that the depictions of different field guides are important. So the inset there is the same bird, the Southwest song sparrow, as depicted by David Sibley versus the Peterson guide above it. And the Sibley rendition is much closer to reality. I mean, it's you can see the difference between the gray back with the rufous streaking and just what a different appearance it has. It's not as washed out and concolorous as that
Peterson's image,
as Peterson's depiction is.
Yeah, and to Peterson's credit, we have come a long way, both in artistic, not necessarily artistic ability, but what we focus on when we're talking about bird identification. And the interesting thing about Peterson is that those photos were written. I mean, those images were drawn like 70 years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago.
Well, and he sort of Peterson devised what's called the Peterson system,
right,
and of field marks where the birds were sort of treated as being the same basic shape and everything. And you look at the field marks, and whereas Sibley was one of the first to, maybe the first, to point out, well, yeah, that's important, but there's this whole other part, gestalt, of the look and feel of the whole bird where, they're totally different. So we're going to pop into the next one here. And so now we see Peterson's Lincoln Sparrow on the left, the bird itself in the photo inset, and on the right we see Sibley's Lincoln Sparrow. And you'll see just the overall shape and expression of the bird. Sibley captures that much better than the sort of cutout figure of a sparrow that is painted with the colors of a Lincoln Sparrow.
And I mean, maybe you're trying to be a little soft pedaling your field guide preferences here, Greg. But I mean, it goes to show why it's always nice to have a few references around. It's good to have a couple field guides to look at and compare. That's why I don't really like. I mean, I don't like to make the choice between Sibley, Nat Geo, Peterson, whatever. I have them all. I have all of them. Plus a bunch of photo field guides too. And I look at eBird and Merle and eBird's images as well frequently when I'm trying to identify birds. So there's a lot of resources out there.
That's all bird field guides back there.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've got a similar looking shelf around here as well. Joe Tuval asks, the bird in question seems like a Lincoln's overall lack of streaking, creamy malar stripe. Exactly. Some things that we had pointed out. And also, song sparrows seem incredibly streaked to me when compared to Lincolns. Exactly. I've said this before in this spot. It was one of the things that my birding mentor told me early on. Song sparrows look like they were drawn. The streaks were drawn with a crayon. Lincoln sparrows look like the streaks were drawn with a freshly sharpened pencil. They're small. They're dark. They're thin. What I think that I find so interesting about the colors on this bird, though, on this Texas bird, is how pale it is. It's so pale that it makes me wonder if there's some sort of plumage thing going on, and
And there
it
might
caused me
be,
to go back. It caused me to go back to this really great piece that David Sibley wrote on his blog back when he was actively writing on his blog about abnormal coloration in birds, and he notes there's one he calls it non-pheomelanic, which is essentially a bird that lacks kind of the warm buff tones of pheomelanin, which is one of the colors that goes into bird coloration. One of the pigments or I forget what those are, but it goes into bird coloration. And birds that lack pheomelanin look gray. They look kind of neutral. They look very pale, which is what's going on with this Lincoln sparrow. So it would not shock me if that was the sort of thing that was happening here. Though obviously there's no way to really know for sure.
Yeah.
It's different looking, that's for sure.
And I mean, there's that, and then there's also individual cameras, and it's really something when I deal with a lot of photographs from a lot of different sources as part of my job, and the way that different cameras, different sensors, capture color, and then when you compress it and put it into a JPEG, you lose it, and so I don't think that that's really what's going on here so much as the bird itself. I think it really looked like that, but that does happen, and it happens a fair amount. So we're let's see here, go into the next.
Tom Larson Ryan has a question, though, if we want to pause with the ID thing. Or do we want to move? We'll come back to you, Tom. Let's talk about this next thing that I think is relevant to the whole sparrow conversation.
Right. So one of the things that that was mentioned in the discussion of that Lincoln sparrow, and we've got one other slide after this that's still going to talk about this Lincoln sparrow. So, Tom, we will get to you.
We did say it was a slow time in birding right now.
People were pointing out the central spot and how Peterson had pointed to the central spot on song sparrow.
Well, maybe he did. Who knows?
Versus the Lincoln, and the lack of it on Lincolns. And Sibley has a great blog post. If you just Google Sibley sparrow central spot, you'll find it right away. And he very accurately describes how the central spot on sparrows is structural. It's not plumage so much, although some of them do. But what happens is the feathers are arranged in what he calls three plates. So you've got a breastplate, and then you've got two side belly plates, and they all meet in the middle here, and there's sort of a gap. And that's what causes all those streaks to kind of blur together and form a spot.
Yeah. It's like someone zipping up a hooded sweatshirt, as I am going to do.
Yeah.
And not going all the way up, right? There's a spot right here. And that's what's happening with the bird's feathers.
And, there are some birds like tree sparrow that actually do have a central dark spot right in that place. But this is a chipping sparrow that would be, a lot of people would call a tree sparrow right out of the bat because it's got that big dark spot. But that's a pitfall.
Because it can give that shadow, and it can give you. I've seen that a lot. We have that happens quite often here in North Carolina, where with chipping sparrow in particular, because people really want to find a tree swallow, which is actually a tree sparrow, which is actually a very good bird in the southeast. And there's two things going on. One, the shadow that you're talking about, this is especially exacerbated when the birds are molting. And two, no bicolored bill. But the thing about winter chipping sparrows is that they can maybe a little bit of a bicolored bill, not as strongly bicolored as an American tree sparrow. But winter chipping sparrows look very different than the summer ones, and people frequently get confused with that bird, at least in the southeast, where we have chipping sparrows year round and almost no American tree sparrows.
Absolutely. And so all of this gets back to just sort of especially when you're looking at the central spot on sparrows as like, oh, it's got a central spot, then it has to be a song sparrow. It's like, no, that's that's really a field mark to be discounted a lot, no matter how much.
The perils of focusing on one field mark at the expense of all the others, all the other things that are going on with the bird. Happens a lot.
So one more slide here, and so here is another Lincoln sparrow on the right, taken in California, and this bird is much, this bird is plumaged as we would expect, with colored as we would expect, and on the left is a savanna sparrow, also taken in California, and you can see what we were talking about earlier, how on the Lincoln sparrow, that malar, that jaw stripe is really noticeable because it's a different color and tone from the rest of the bird's face. Whereas the savanna sparrow on the left, you'll see that the auricular, which is the ear patch around the eye, that cheek patch, is framed by the eyebrow called the supercilium and the malar, and they're sort of framed. Form a frame around that auricular, and it gives it a very different look, even though many other parts of the bird look extremely similar. The bill size and shape, the kind of heaviness of the streaking, the little raised crest, all of that looks really similar, but then focus in on the face and notice how different an appearance that is.
Yeah, and this particular angle makes them look almost quite similar. But we talked about how shape is important when we're talking about sparrows, and if we were looking at these birds side on, you would see that a little bit more, especially with the savanna sparrow, which tends to be very longer bodied and short tailed compared to a Lincoln sparrow, which, while not as long tailed as a song sparrow, which is a very kind of lanky, drag that tail around sort of sparrow. Right. Lincoln sparrow is a little bit shorter, but they still has that kind of classic Melospiza look that is kind of long-tailed and shorter bodied, which is the opposite of what you see in a savanna sparrow.
Yes. And so now, continuing with brown streaky things.
But we're going to get back to Tom's question. Maybe.
Let's get to Tom's question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, ignore the birds on your screen right now, folks. We'll come back to them. So Tom asks about mentors. How do you find a mentor? How do you get a birding mentor? And I don't know if there's really a cut and dried, works for everybody sort of answer for that question, because every individual's mentor story is different. But I'll tell you, mine was when I was a young birder. When you're a young birder, everyone wants to help you out. And then I was involved with a local Audubon chapter in Southwest Missouri, Greater Ozarks Audubon chapter. And I would kind of be the precocious kid tagging along with the older birders. And they would, they'd pass on these little pearls of wisdom, especially the song sparrow, Lincoln sparrow one, and other things that have stuck with me over the years. But, your local bird clubs are great places to get people. Although, in the internet age, you can find a lot of different people online that are willing to help. Although, internet interaction can be touchy sometimes. What do you think, Greg? How would you go about finding a mentor?
Well, I think everything you said is spot on. When I was a kid birder, and like you were saying, I was precocious, and I would go out and you can pretty quickly identify who the experienced birders are when you're at a place where there's a lot of birders. So for me, it was the Chicago lakefront, and then I would just hang tight to them and just sort of glean whatever they're like scoping ducks or looking at birds in a tree or whatever and calling out warblers, and then just gently asking questions. So you don't want to throw somebody off their game if they're working a flock of birds, but just kind of hang tight, hang close, and look at what they're looking and ask some questions and sort of get in that way. And I was so full of eagerness to learn this stuff that there were a few adults. I was very lucky to have several really amazing mentors as a teenage birder. But there were a few adults that just wanted nothing to do with me. They're like,
Yeah, that
I don't
happens
want
too.
a teenager anywhere near me. And the same can go for adults. There are people birders that are very good, but if you're just starting out, and they can be like, you know what, I just don't have time to be teacher today. And
Yeah.
so you just kind of tread, and just you figure it out.
Yeah.
The ABA has a mentorship program for beginning for teenage birders, but we don't have anything really like that for adults.
Yeah.
Because as you can imagine, it's kind of a tricky situation. However, there are places like Nate was just suggesting, Facebook groups, but local bird clubs really are the place where you're going to meet people and get involved with your local bird club.
Yeah, and a lot of local bird clubs, I've seen this in a lot of different places where they have specific sort of, I don't know, novice bird walks. Like that way you're going to be with people who are similar to you, or people who want to teach. So
Yeah.
you don't have to worry too much about whether or not you're getting on someone who got up on the wrong side of the bed that morning. So that helps. And of course, there are a lot of really great other kind of alternate organizations, I should say, that are outside sort of the typical bird club model. Things like Feminist Bird Club in New York City and I know there are some chapters of those around who do a really great job kind of reaching out specifically to non-traditional birders, people who are maybe feel intimidated by the birding community and want a sort of a way in. And those people should be certainly called out for the great work that they're doing as well.
Absolutely. So this collection of images here. So I put this together because one of the things we're seeing in What's This Bird a lot right now, because of the cold in much of the ABA area, people are getting more birds at their feeders and a little bit more variety of birds at their feeders than they otherwise might. And there's a lot of brown streaky things showing up at people's feeders.
It's brown streaky season.
And these are three of the most talked about, asked about species that might show up at feeders. So what do we got going on here?
So we've got three kind of brown streaky birds, but there are some different things going on that I think are important to note. One, we've talked a lot about shape and size and kind of gestalt in birds here, and I'm gonna draw that again because we can see the difference between the two birds in the image on the top and the flock of birds in the image on the bottom. While they are sort of superficially similar, they're all sort of brown streaky, but what we've got is some different things going on. The birds on the bottom have a longer bill, more narrow bill. Just in general, they're kind of lankier shaped. They have longer wings and longer legs. So so you would go to a different place. You wouldn't necessarily find them with the finches, with the birds that are streaky but have sort of the conical bill as the two birds sitting on the feeders at the top. And also, the fact that they're sitting on feeders as opposed to on the ground. The birds on the bottom are on the ground, which is an important behavioral thing to note. So I'll just go ahead and say the ones on the bottom, the big flock of birds, these are red-winged blackbirds, as people in the comments are probably already noting. This is a bird that a lot of people are seeing this time of year and thinking are finches or sparrows because they are, feeding on the ground. They are brown and streaky, but they're shaped quite differently. They're a different size as well. They typically tend to be a bit bigger. I'll let you handle the two on the top, Greg.
Sure. Well, they have, and the red-winged blackbirds do have conical bills, but much thinner and more pointy, as Nate pointed out. And birds have wings, and as Tom points out, red-winged blackbirds will hit up a tray feeder. I've seen them on other types of feeders, but blackbirds tend, and again, this is all like usual situations. They tend to come in flocks, and when you get a bunch of birds that all look alike in a flock. That also kind of narrows down the possibilities. Now, all three of the birds in this image can hit feeders in flocks. As a matter of fact,
Yeah, the
the
one
bird on the
finch you
right.
didn't put on here, the one finch you didn't put on here that is likely to hit feeders and flock, especially this time of year, that is also brown and streaky, is pine siskin.
Yes, that's true. That is true. And that's only because there wasn't a pine siskin in What's This Bird in the last
That's true. Yeah, maybe they're all
15
gone.
days. You know, I've been
gone.
running through this. All of these pictures are grabbed from the What's This Bird group on Facebook. So, you know, if there wasn't a pine siskin in the last week or two, I didn't get it. But you know, the two on the top there are very frequently asked about and mistaken for each other. The one on the left is a female type, could be a young male purple finch, and the one on the right is a house finch. And the first thing you notice is just how much more there is going on the purple finch on the left.
Yep, definitely.
It's got patterns and bold markings, and the bird on the right is very kind of just diluted and muted and just not a whole lot.
Blurry.
Especially the face is very plain. It's got a very plain face and head. Now the bill shape, it's hard to really see in this picture, but you'll notice that the bills are different shapes, and the purple finch has a very, you know, I can't get it, but it's a very
pointy,
triangular shaped bill with straight lines, and the house finch, the bill is more curved. It's got what's called a curved culmen, which is the top. That top part, that top line of the bill is curved, and it gives it a different expression and a different look.
Yeah. The Great Backyard Bird Count is this weekend. It started today. It's going on through the weekend, and typically that event brings a lot of people into the birding community and onto eBird that perhaps have not been on there in the past. You know, a lot of novice birders, a lot of new birders, and this is one that this is a confusion pair that is frequently found on there. And when I used to do reviews for the Great Backyard Bird Count and try and catch the mistaken purple finches, although this year it'd be quite difficult because there are almost as many purple finches down here as there are house finches, it feels like. But in most years, that's not the case. That bill, pointing out that bill, was always a very useful thing. It seemed to resonate with a lot of people. The purple finch, the bill is, as you say, the culmen, the top edge of the bill is straight, makes the bill look pointy. On the house finch, the culmen is kind of curved, makes the bill look dull, makes it look blunted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you definitely see.
And the face pattern of purple finch is always there, even in the males. It's covered by this rich raspberry color, but that the underlying face pattern is there, and you can see it. And the house finch just doesn't have that. So that face pattern is key.
Tom asks, will siskins come back through in numbers, or if we missed fall migration, will we have missed them? I suspect that they'll probably come back in numbers to the places that they were in the fall. They pushed south in huge numbers. I have not seen siskins in a while. Usually I have a flock flying around the neighborhood that I hear. I suspect that they will come back. They tend to migrate later than a lot of the other finches, so they'll linger into May sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we're in Chicago. We had thousands of siskins come through in the fall and early winter, and we had dozens and dozens of evening grosbeaks, and those birds are all like southern Illinois. They're 300, 600 miles south of us, and they've been there since December. And just hanging out at feeders and wherever they're hanging out. And in
Jenny
March,
says she has 75 in her yard today. So, that's where your siskins are. They're in the Carolinas, evidently.
You know, in March, exactly, in the Carolinas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Southern Illinois, that sort of band. And in March and April, those birds will be moving north. And a little bit of just sort of a tangent here. You know, back in the 70s when I was a teenage birder, and evening grosbeaks were not so rare, it was an expected spring migrant, and April was the time that we looked for that bird. People think of it as a winter finch, and we certainly did see them in the fall and winter, but April was when we got them coming back north.
Yeah, notably, when the evening grosbeak was the ABA's Bird of the Year way back in 2012 with cover art by Julie Zickafoos, she chose to illustrate them in the spring. So it was not a winter, cover art. It was in some sort of flowering tree. I don't recall offhand what it was, but it was a spring picture, which was reminiscent of her experience with them. I believe she grew up in Massachusetts and lives in Ohio now. So, yeah, it tracks.
Okay, so we're going to move on here. And
I will say before we move on, if you have any questions about birds or birding, it doesn't have to be about bird ID. Just let us know in the comments, and we'll be happy to tackle those questions as they come in.
Jenny asked climate change. Well, in the case of the evening grosbeaks, there may be some of that involved, but and this is kind of an interesting story, and the data right now is anecdotal, and but what some people are suggesting is that because of COVID, last year crews were not out spraying the forests to the north to stop the spruce budworms.
Yeah,
and
so evening grosbeaks are spruce budworm species. Yeah.
Yes, they feed their young on spruce budworms, and because they weren't spraying the forest, but from airplanes with insecticide to stop spruce budworms, the evening grosbeaks just had unlimited food to raise their babies, and that is what is thought to be a big reason why we're seeing so many more evening grosbeaks. These birds that are now, they had all this food in the form of budworms, and now it's, the budworms are all dead because they got cold, and the birds have to move on. And it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I talked to Matt Young, and he, on the American Birding Podcast, you can go back and find that episode. He said the same thing. And he said that once that spruce budworm genie is sort of out of the bottle, it's really hard to get back in. So this could be the first of what could be successive winters where evening grosbeaks are coming down into the south, farther south than they have in the past. So it could be interesting.
And it could be, because these birds, what happens with birds that have eruption years, snowy owls is another one that's when there's a lot of lemmings around. If you search, you can find pictures of snowy owl nests that are lined with dead lemmings. Dozens of dead lemmings that are just sitting there waiting for the babies to eat them. And other years not so much. And so when there's a lot of food for snowy owls, they raise. All the babies survive. And all the parents are successful, and all of these young birds, they move south in big numbers, and we get them, in the United States and southern Canada. But then they have a hard time of it, and they have a hard time finding food. They're raised in a situation of gluttony, and then they get down to the farm fields of Minnesota or someplace else, and there's just not as much food, and it's much harder to get, and the birds are fighting for the same resource. And the bottom line is there's not as many birds that survive the winter then and go back up to breed. But in the case of evening grosbeaks, these birds are finding a lot of food. There's feeders all over the place. There's a lot of food for these birds. And so they'll be going back up. And now we have this sort of situation, the beginning of exponential growth of evening grosbeak populations that we haven't seen in decades.
Yeah, it is interesting. We tend to think of these eruption years mean something bad is going on in the north, when sometimes, in the case of evening grosbeaks and snowy owls in particular, it could mean that something very, very good is going on in the north, and those birds have to disperse to find food in the winter.
Right.
And this is sadly the season, the time of year when those young owls tend to not make it, because this is towards the end of winter and they've made it this far, and this is the tough season for owls. Right now.
And for birds that have to catch things, this is the tough season. For birds that eat seeds, this is really a good season because so many people. I mean, bird feeding has become so popular. I live in a very urban area with tiny little backyards and a lot of busy streets and no real bird habitat. But within like a 6 or 8 block area of my house, there's feeders all over the place, and there's all kinds of birds just hanging out, stuffing their little faces. But let's
talk about this bird. We've already got some people on YouTube trying to identify it. So
let's talk about this duck here. What's this duck?
Yeah. So what we got here is a water bird. It's got a long bill and sort of a large blocky head. That long bill would rule out a number of things like most ducks and geese.
Well, the fact that it's pointed. So like a northern shoveler has a long bill, but it's also got this big spatula thing going on.
Yeah, merganser too.
Mergansers, mergansers, they kind of have pointed bills, but not spiky like this. And
not yellow. Yellow is kind of the key here. It's got a light colored bill. Looks like it's got kind of a long neck, Greg. It's kind of leaned back. It's a little weird as far as the angle. But that would, to me, rule out a loon, because loons tend to be very blocky. They also tend to be very long, and this body looks compact.
I was just going to get to that. This bird looks like a kind of like a cotton ball with a head. It's just like a fluff ball floating on the water with a head sticking out of it.
Yeah, and no discernible tail.
I mean, you could almost put the head at either end and it would work. And that is, as we'll see in a moment too, that is sort of a signature of grebes, which are really neat, really neat birds that are. They feed underwater. They catch fish, insects, crayfish, things like that. Google grebe foot if you want to see a picture of what their feet look like. It's really cool.
Podicipediforms.
And with the exception of the western grebe, which is very distinctive, the grebes kind of all look alike in winter plumage. In summer, in breeding plumage, they're all very distinct and beautiful. But in winter plumage, they all kind of look like this. And what we see on this bird, as Nate pointed out, is the long yellow bill and that dark cap, which points us to red-necked grebe.
Red-necked grebe. So of the North American grebe species, there are 3 that are sort of long-necked and long-billed. So the Acmophoros, what I don't know how to pronounce it. The pair, the Western and Clark's grebe, and then red-necked. And Western and Clark's generally, the head and neck and body is just like much cleaner lines between the black and white. And telling those 2 birds apart can be quite difficult. But if it's kind of smudgy gray-brown all over, definitely the red-necked is the way to go. And podicipediforms, as you say, that podiceps, that means like legs, feet on the back, which is what they are. They're on the very back of it. You can even see the legs sticking out.
I was just going to say, you can. Yeah. That sort of dark mark at the back of the bird before the little white tail fluff is the bird's leg as it's paddling. That's how far back these birds' legs are.
Ankle hinge.
And some old illustrations you'll find, Victorian illustrations of grebes, has them standing up like penguins, which they can do for a second or two until they flop over on their faces.
Yeah, they don't really walk.
No.
They kind of shuffle. They push their they move on land like they move on the water. They lean forward, their front end lays on the ground, and then they kind of kick. They don't move on land very well. In fact, a lot of in migration, a lot of birds will land on land thinking that maybe a wet, slick parking lot is a lake or something, and they'll get trapped there because they can't get back off the ground. They need to paddle their little feet and get a running start to get up in the air again. So that happens pretty frequently, especially with eared grebes in the West. And a lot of times if you just pick it up and move it to like a pond, just any water, that's enough for it to get a runway to get moving again.
Yeah, anything, like even a drainage ditch, just if they can get some momentum in the water, they're fine. Tom asks, don't grebes sometimes sun their feet? Well, they do stick their feet up in the air somewhat frequently.
I would if my feet were like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if they actually like use it to signal each other, or I don't know if anybody's actually done any kind of observation of that enough to know, but you will see pictures, and you'll see occasionally where they just kind of stretch and stick their feet up and wave their feet. And so here we have another similar bird, again from the West Coast, this one from California. Same body shape, same kind of color, same kind of fluffy thing, but look at the
same lack of tail.
Same lack of tail. What's the difference we see here?
Well, the bill is clearly different. So this one, instead of having that long yellow bill, has kind of a stubby little gray bill, which is more indicative of the smaller grebes here in North America. And then the it's all over kind of brown, maybe shows a little bit of darkness on the face. I don't usually think of this bird as having an eye ring. I think it does have light feathers around the eye, and I think the sun is kind of shining on it and making that look a little more prominent than you typically see. But a little brown thing with a short little dinky bill on a reservoir is a pretty common sight in my part of the country, at least. And it's pied-billed grebe, although this one's bill is not pied, as they are not in the summer. In the winter,
in the summer, it's a whitish bill with a black mark on it. Pied means
see a little
black
bit of
and
that
white.
On this one, but not.
Yeah, you can sort of see it. But that big chunky bill, that thick sort of almost like a finch-like bill, is unique to the pied-billed grebe in our area. There are other small grebes that have more pointed bills, like horned grebe and eared grebe. Eared grebe has a particularly slender bill. Least grebe, which is found along the Rio Grande River and in southeast Arizona, has a small bill like this, but it's thinner. It's not big and chunky like this.
Yeah, pied-billed grebes love eating crustaceans. Like they'll go to town on crayfish and things like that. And so you think of a finch as a bird that crushes seeds. Pied-billed grebe crushes crawdads.
Yep, I was just going there, and that's a good thing.
We've done this enough to know.
Form follows function.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have one more picture. I don't know if we have any.
So one more. If you guys have any questions or anything about bird ID, please let us know in the comments wherever you are watching this. And if you want to watch this again, I don't know necessarily why you would, but you could go to the ABA's YouTube channel, and these are all of our What's This Birds are hosted there in perpetuity till the end of time.
So these are birds that come into What's This Bird often, and not these two particular, just sort of what I call Manky Geese. And these are they're obviously geese. I think everybody who is even fairly familiar with birds knows what a goose looks like. But there's we have a number of species of geese that are wild in the ABA area, and then we have birds like this, and these are domesticated or domestic hybrids of geese. And so the bird on the right is a Chinese goose, but you'll see that big fluffy butt. That is a not indicative, but domesticated geese have that big fluffy butt. A lot of time.
And the deep belly.
Yeah, that big heavy belly. These birds are bred to be big. And the bird on the left is a hybrid. Looks like a Canada goose and could be.
It's got Canada goose in it.
It looks like Canada goose, and I don't know, maybe. I don't know. It's got the big orange feet.
Yeah, maybe
of
graylag or
of
something in there. It's
graylag.
just
Yeah,
some
could be
like Canada
graylag.
goose that has been bred back, you know, with
I
other
mean, is
weird
that a little
Canada geese.
knob? Is that a little knob on the bill?
It
I don't
looks like
know.
it.
Um,
Yeah, it's just a weird bird.
but we see a lot of these weird birds, and so basically you can just categorize them all as just domestic, I don't know, Manky geese.
Manky geese. Yeah.
And they're mallards. You know, you see a lot of domestic mallards that are in the same situation, and that are the same situation. And so the key here is to learn the species of birds, the species of geese that are likely in your area for most people. That's Canada goose, cackling goose, maybe white-fronted snow, maybe brant, depending on where, if you're on the coast. And then, you'll see these other birds, and once you learn the species that you have, these birds will be easy to just sort of push aside, say, okay, that's not something to pay too much attention to in terms of the birding that we're doing here. Although there are a lot of people that really enjoy spending time with them in parks and feeding them and just like having them around.
I can't figure that out, but yeah, sure.
Well, if you've ever spent some time
They're
with
mean.
them,
Geese are mean.
Geese are mean. I keep remembering that really great. And I'm probably going to blow the paraphrasing of this, but it was someone who visited from Mexico, and in Mexico, Canada, the further south you go, the Canada geese get rare. And once you get south of Texas, the Canada geese are unheard of. And someone visited from Mexico and was asked what they thought of, I think they meant it with maybe Chicago or someplace up in the Northeast where there's a lot of Canada geese. Like, what did you think of the situation, where you were? It's like, oh, everything was wonderful, but the cobra chickens were terrible. Of course, that's a Canada goose, which will chase you and hiss at you.
Yeah. Yeah, they're awful. Good food for gray foxes, though.
Yeah.
Coyotes.
Okay, so I think that is it for our photos. If we have any other questions, or if anybody wants to bring anything
shoot us
else
some
up to
some
discuss.
questions if you have them. I don't see anything.
We've got a few more minutes here.
Jim Fiermeyer on YouTube notes that greater white-fronted geese and Canada goose hybrids are sometimes found in Indiana.
Yes.
Yeah, that's this thing you'll find in the Midwest, in particular the Central Flyway, because that population of Canada geese and the greater white-fronted geese that nest up in northern Canada frequently nest side by side, and you'll see some hybrids. Geese do hybridize, but not as much as the ducks do for the most part.
Yeah, and one thing that a Canada white-fronted hybrid is not going to walk up to you and ask for bread or demand it.
That's true. You're probably not going to get quite as good a photo as those as that swan goose, the cell phone photo. All right. Well, we've been at this for. So Tom really wants you to pish, Greg. I don't know if you want to give that secret away, but maybe not. It doesn't. It's one of those things that doesn't really translate on microphones very well. It sounds very weird.
It doesn't. But I'll tell you, if you want to, basically, it's saying the word push, but taking the U out of it. So, psh, psh. And if you get on Xenocanto, which is a website, XENO, I'll see, or maybe Nate, if you can put it in the comments on Facebook, xenocanto.org, and then search up European starling and search up the alarm calls of European starling. You'll find one in particular, which, at least in my neighborhood, is what they do when they see a cat. And it's this loud kind of hissy growl that just sounds like psh, psh, and birds really respond to that. And so, it's sort of the wrens make a kind of a similar noise, which is sort of a bunch of chips really rapidly together, where it sounds like a hissing noise. And they do it over and over and over again when they found an owl or a cat or something that they consider to be a predator,
Dangerous, yeah.
Dangerous, or even interesting. I've been walking in places where birds haven't run into a lot of humans, and they come down and do the same thing. I was growled at by a bunch of toucans in Peru one time. They acted like chickadees that had found an owl, and they mobbed me and were. But that's what you're trying to imitate, is that sort of that growly, hissy noise.
Yeah, I always base my pitching on the birds that I hear around me. So if it's primarily titmice, then I'll try and sound like a titmouse. If it's primarily chickadees, I'll try and sound like a chickadee. If there are wrens yelling, I'll try and sound like that wren. That seems to do the job. Getting those birds kind of worked up. And flocks of warblers, you can probably do like a little, and they seem to respond really well to that as well. At least in my experience. And everyone has their own little pitching tips.
Absolutely. And another little tip is that it works much better in the fall with juvenile birds than it does, young birds, than it does in the spring, for a couple of reasons. One, birds are they're not as easily fooled, but in the springtime they're just too busy. They're not hanging out, they're not curious. In the fall, you get a good pushing session. I've had, literally 20, 30 birds like just right over my head of 6 or 7
and you get
species.
those, and you get those first year birds, those young ones that are too dumb to know the difference between a real threat and a person making a call. And all you have to do is get those birds working and making the authentic thing, and then other things will start coming in.
And so when we do that pitching, what we're actually doing is we're educating those birds and helping them learn the real thing from. Yeah, so that's
yeah. A lot of people have pitching ideas. Even Pete Dunne was writing about it 30 years ago. So
yeah.
All right, so we're up to about an hour, and I don't see anything additional. I'm making a quick check through all the various stuff. I don't see anything. So Greg, I think we'll probably say adios for this session, and we'll catch you in a couple of weeks. We'll see you back
here in a couple of weeks. Thanks for popping in, everybody. And
if
you enjoy what we're doing here, and
do the thing.
And this is our day job, and so if you enjoy this and want us to keep doing it, wrong hand, right up here, aba.org/join. And you can join us and be a part of everything the ABA is doing, and help us keep doing things like this, and help you identify birds and learn about birds. And Jenny just chimed in with the join link.
Wrong.
Thank you very much. Len Kopka just joined, apparently too late.
Way.
Yeah. Thank you, Len, and welcome to the club.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you around. We'll be doing this again.
Bird on.
Have a good day.